On October 4th, 1957, the world watched in fear as the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the world's first man-made satellite into space. This little metal ball smaller than 2 feet in diameter launched a space race between the US and the USSR that would last for 18 years and change the world as we know it. Sputnik was not actually the first piece of human tech to enter space. That would go to the V-2 rocket by Germany in missile attacks used against Allied cities in the last-ditch effort in the final wars of World War II. It wasn't really effective, but at the end of the war, both the US and USSR captured the tech and the scientists that developed it and began using them for their own projects, and by August of 1957, the Soviets successfully tested the first intercontinental ballistic missile, the R-7. This same rocket would be used to launch Sputnik 2 months later into space. The scary thing about Sputnik was not the orbiting ball itself, but the fact that the same tech could be used to launch a nuclear warhead at any city. In an attempt to keep up, President Eisenhower ordered the Navy to speed up its own projects and launch a satellite ASAP. On December 6, 1957, excited people across the nation tuned in to watch the live broadcasts as the Vanguard TV-3 satellite took off and crashed to the ground 2 seconds later. The Vanguard failure was such a huge embarrassment for the United States, the newspapers printed headlines such as Flopnik and Kaputnik, and a Soviet delegate in the UN mockingly suggested that the US should receive foreign aid for developing nations. Fortunately, the Army has been working on their own parallel project, the Explorer, which was successfully launched in January of 1958, but the US had barely managed to catch up before they were surpassed again as Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space in April 1961. After almost a year, the Soviet astronauts completed their missions before Project Mercury succeeded in making John Glenn the first American in orbit in February of 1962. Around then, President Kennedy had realized that simply catching up to each Soviet advancement a few months later wasn't going to cut it, so they had to do something first. In May of 1961, a month after Gagarin's flight, he announced the goal of putting a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s. The U.S. succeeded in this through the Apollo program, with Neil Armstrong taking his famous steps on July 20th of 1969. Soon after that, with improving relations, Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev and U.S. President Nixon moved towards cooperation rather than competition. The successful joint mission known as Apollo-Soyuz, in which an American Apollo spacecraft docked with Soviet Soyuz craft and the two crews met, shook hands, and exchanged gifts, marked the end of the space race in 1975. So in the end, the biggest benefit of the space program had nothing to do with one country beating another, but rather the space race funding for research and education in general, which increased dramatically, leading to many advances that may not have otherwise been made. Many NASA technologies developed for space are now widely used in civilian life. These may include memory foam, freeze-dried food, cancer treatment LEDs, and of course the satellites we use for GPS and mobile phone signals.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming to this International Space Affairs press conference. Can you please state your names and position to the audience?
Привет, I am Sergei Korolev, the lead Soviet rocket engineer and spacecraft designer for the Soviet Union.
Hello, fellow Americans. My name is John F. Kennedy, and I'm the proud president of the United States of America.
So, what are your plans for future space expeditions?
Since our launch of Sputnik this month in October 1957, we are planning to launch the most advanced creature to walk the Earth, a dog. This beauty's name goes by Laika.
Almost like the US is beating the Soviet Union in the space race.
Very funny. The jokes are why the United States never succeeds in anything in the past 200 years.
Gentlemen, please calm down. There is no need for tensions right now. Moving on to the US, what are your plans regarding future space expeditions?
Our plans are to launch the first US satellite in orbit by the end of January 1958, and then travel to the moon. No chance we put animals in space like the uncivilized Soviets.
We are way too far ahead of these stupid Americans. By 1961, we will have launched the first man into space.
We have gathered the best space engineers and scientists from across the country to work on this project, and in due time, we shall surpass the Soviets in this space race.
Let me guess, your qualified scientist is just Marilyn Monroe. Just know that you will never amount to any Soviet technological advances in the rocket science field, and that you will lose this race.
What do you think the impact of this space race will have on both of your respective nations' economies?
Well, I, for one, think that this will be an excellent stimulation for our economy. So it seems to be a win-win situation. Because we will win the space race, make the Americans proud, and boost the economy all while beating the Soviets.
We'll see how that goes.
Alright, that's enough. I wish both of you good luck and maybe one of you will actually land on the moon soon.
Thank you. We have gathered the best scientists and engineers from across the country to work on this project, and in due time, we shall...
Sorry.
Dude, we are fine.
No, we'll cut it there and just continue.
Alright, we'll pause at the applause.
Yeah.